Well, as we continue on in our series, we're going to read a passage from 1 Samuel chapter 3. 1 Samuel chapter 3. I invite you to turn there as we consider this young boy whose name is Samuel and the man who becomes something of a mentor to him, and then consider for a few moments what it means mentorship can mean for us. So from 1 Samuel chapter 3, and we'll read through the end of the chapter. It's really one account. So the boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare, and there were not many visions. One night Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called to Samuel, and Samuel answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call you. Go back and lie down." So he went back and lay down. Again the Lord called, "Samuel." And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." "My son," Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel a third time, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears it tingle. At that time I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family from beginning to end. For I told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons made themselves contemptible, and he failed to restrain them. Therefore I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering." Samuel lay down until morning and then opened the doors of the house of the Lord. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision, but Eli called him and said, "Samuel, my son?" Samuel answered, "Here I am." "What is it he said to you?" Eli asked. "Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you, be it ever so severely, if you hide from me anything he told you." So Samuel told him everything, hiding nothing from him. Then Eli said, "He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes." And the Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word. I don't know if any of you are fans of Clint Eastwood, but if you've ever seen a movie called Gran Torino, it's a movie about a man who's played by Clint Eastwood, and he has come back from the Korean War and kind of settled in Everytown, USA. And next to him and in his town, a number of those from Thailand, who are the Hmong people. They have come and also settled there. And so the plot begins by a young boy who lives near Clint Eastwood, a teenager. He is being initiated into a local gang, and so part of the plot is for him to steal the Gran Torino that Clint Eastwood's character has in his garage. Now, Clint Eastwood is not a lovable character in this particular movie. He's gruff, he's racist, especially among those very people. But over time, after he catches the boy and threatens to blow a hole in his head with a shotgun, he eventually comes to have a relationship with the boy, and he becomes kind of a mentor to him, even with all his faults, even with all kind of battling against his own racist ideals. He becomes something of a mentor to that young boy in the film. It's a picture of an imperfect man that kind of comes out of his shell enough to do something that's good and invest himself, at least in the life of one young boy, and makes a difference. He's an imperfect mentor, to be sure, but he becomes a mentor and has a positive impact upon the young man. As we read the account of Eli and Samuel, I think we find a similar type of theme, that Eli is an imperfect mentor. But by investing in the life of this one young man, Samuel, he does make a difference that outlives him, even if it's not, his impact is not in his family itself. And challenge us a little bit. Sometimes the reason we resist, perhaps, pouring into the life of another is because we are glaringly aware of our own failures. We're glaringly aware of our own weaknesses. And we ask this question, how can I be a mentor to someone else? So in this series that we've been looking at, we've been considering how we need some significant relationships in our life. And we've suggested perhaps there needs to be 3 significant relationships that need to be ongoing in our life. First thing is we need someone to learn from. Just like we looked at the passages that had to do with Elisha and Elijah the mentor and Elisha the mentee, just like Elisha had someone come into his life and wasn't easy on them, but taught him some hard lessons, we need someone who we're continuing to learn from, whether we're a child or a teenager and a young individual, or whether we're a senior citizen. We need someone that we can continue to learn from, someone that we give the authority to pour into our lives. We spent 2 weeks looking at that idea from different characters, different accounts in the Bible, and then we spent 2 weeks looking at we need someone that we can lean on. Someone that, not that we have an idealized figure of someone we want to lean on, but they kind of let us down, but really someone who's going to stand beside us in the difficult times. And we looked especially last week at Job's 3 friends, who at the beginning of the book of Job, they did exactly what they needed to do. 7 days they sat with a suffering Job. They didn't offer him any advice, any quaint sayings to help him through his suffering, but they sat with him. They shared in that experience. And for that time, they did well. Where they begin to go a little bit off the rails is trying to provide Job a quick and easy answer to his questions, which they did not have the ability to provide. So now we come to this part where we think about who then are we investing in ourselves? Who are we spending time with? Who are we investing our resources of talent and maybe even some financial resources in order to kind of bring them along and to be a mentor to someone else? And again, what I think prevents sometimes us from doing that is that we misunderstand what it means to be a mentor, that somehow we think only perfect people, only people that have it all together, they should be mentors. But I want to suggest that Eli gives us an example of someone who invests in the life of someone else, but they have all kinds of problems going on. But still, they're able to make a difference in the life of someone else. So we want to look at Eli in 2 different categories. Eli the man on one hand, and then Eli the mentor on the other. Eli the man, and then Eli the mentor. We're going to have to do a little bit of background to get a picture of Eli the man. Now, the first time we're introduced to Eli the man is in chapter 1. And it actually begins with the story of Samuel's parents, whose names are Hannah and Elkanah. Elkanah is a husband of 2 wives at this time. They're not suggesting in Samuel that that's a good idea. It just describes that happened to be the way it was. This man had 2 wives. On the one hand was Peninnah, and on the other hand was Hannah. Peninnah had lots of children, was able to bear children for Elkanah. Hannah at this time was barren. But they'd go up every year to the place at Shiloh where Eli was the priest, and they would offer sacrifices. They would perform their religious duties because Elkanah was a deeply religious man. And one year when they go up, Hannah, who has not been able to have a child and is deeply distressed, she goes in to worship and to pray. And she is praying so fervently that no words come out, but her lips are moving. She's praying out of her heart to God. Now Eli, he comes across as kind of a crusty old man because he sees her doing that and he casts judgment on her. Put away your wine, he says. Stop being drunk and coming into the worship site here. Put away your wine and get your life straight. And I have to admit that I understand a little bit of what Eli is going through. Now, the reason he probably says that is because this is not the first time he's encountered that. After a while in ministry, sometimes we become a little bit crusted to some of the disappointments we go through. And this was reinforced to me a little bit when I was pastoring at Edith Avenue. There was a man who called up to the church, and He had just come into the community. He didn't have a place to stay. He told me very much his hard luck story. And so I said, well, let me help you. So we had gotten him some groceries and gotten him some food, and he really needed a location to stay. So we found a little want ad or an article in the paper in the classified section that there was a room for rent. And so we went over so he could meet the person and maybe get a room there. Because he was new to the city, because he didn't have any references to go by, the deposit, which normally would be, say, $100, it all of a sudden was $500 because he didn't have any background. And so I kind of, my eyebrows went up and kind of said, can't you cut a guy a break? And the fellow looked at me and he said, well, you're a pastor. He said, you are trained to see the good in people. He said, I see the worst in people. It's $500. But I come to understand what he meant. That sometimes when you see the same thing over and over, you get burned over and over. You become a little bit crusted to the situation, a little bit resistant. And so I think Eli, he's been around the block. He's seen a few things. And so when he saw Hannah, he made assumptions. And in his assumptions, he accused her of being drunk. Turns out that she was just fervent in prayer. And so after he realizes that, he opens up a little bit and he blesses her and sends her on her way. And she does have a child, and that child's name is Samuel. And she is so thrilled with what God has blessed her with that she dedicates that child to God's service. And by doing that, she actually brings him to this location in Shiloh, and she allows him to live there with Eli being his mentor. And so that's when we're first introduced to Eli, someone who, right off the bat, the account in 1 Samuel tells us that he's kind of crusty, kind of quick to rush to judgment. And here he is now being the mentor to this young boy, Samuel. The second thing we come to find out about about Eli, is that he's a bad father. And there's no two ways about it. He's a bad father. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 12. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men, and they did not know the Lord. The chapter then goes on to describe their transgressions. They were priests, even though they did not know the Lord in the judgment of 1 Samuel. They still were priests, kind of under their father. And they would come and steal, essentially, some of the sacrifices that people had come to Shiloh to offer to the Lord. They would steal larger chunks than were available to them. Those who did not give in to their demands, they bullied them until they did. They threatened them with God's wrath until they gave in to them. And then we're told that they would use their positions as priests to be able to have sexual relations with the women who would be coming to the worship site. They were people of corrupt character. They were people who should have known better, but did not. And now we're told that Eli knew all of these things, and he didn't do anything about it. I remember riding the buses when I was in Scotland. I grew up, of course, in Canada, just like in North America, and public transportation, one, not always widely available, and two, not always what you want to be involved in. If you have your car, you take yourself rather than go in public transportation. But a little bit different in Scotland. In the city of Edinburgh, where we were, public transportation was taken by everybody. So whether you were a homeless man trying to go from point A to point B, or you were a lawyer, or you were a college professor, people just took public transportation. And it was great if you were a people watcher, which I like to be. You could get on the bus and go for trips, and you could see all kinds of folks in all kinds of circumstances and kind of get to know them, wonder about their backstory. And I remember one time, a young mother came on with her child. Child was probably elementary school age. And as I learned this past week, helping lead Bible studies, sometimes elementary school age children are rambunctious. And this child was rambunctious. And the mother was becoming very frustrated with that. And so she would say those words that perhaps parents have used since time immemorial. If you don't stop, then I will. Any parents ever said that before? Have you ever had to draw that out? If you don't stop, then I will. So, if you don't stop, then I will. And the child didn't stop. So then she turned to, if you don't stop, then I will. And the child didn't stop. If you don't stop, then I will. And what I came to learn is that what that statement means is, if you don't stop, then I will say stop again. and there will be no consequences whatsoever for what you've done. And so I tried to put that into practice by, if I said something, if I will, then, if I want to be consistent, then I had to do what I just said that I was going to do. And sometimes I would realize my own mistaken judgment. They would do it again, they would get the consequence, and then I'd have to go back an hour later and apologize to them because I made a mistake. The punishment didn't fit the crime. But I had to learn that I had made the apology, and the apologizing was better than just saying, if you don't stop, then I'm going to say stop again, because that really doesn't work. They're not going to stop. But Eli's version of parenting seemed to be, if you don't stop, then I will say stop again. And it had no consequences. And his sons became people whose character did not match the position that their father had, or what he would teach others. It was a miserable kind of circumstances that he was in there. And so you see this man being kind of quick to judgment out of the first chapter, and out of the second chapter not being a very effective parent. The third introduction we're given to Eli, though, is in the passage that we read just a few moments ago. In the immediate preceding chapter. Eli then gets a visit from a man of God. Not in this vision that Samuel has, but in the immediate preceding passage, a man of God actually comes to Eli and says, Eli, the judgment of God is coming upon you and your sons because of your work. And it seems that Eli takes those words to heart, but then again doesn't change anything. He's actually offered the opportunity by a prophet coming through and telling him what is about to take place, and it does not make any effect into his life. So he's also a man who does not always listen well to others. So here's this man, quick to judgment, doesn't seem to have a very good ability to mentor his own children, somebody who hears the word of God and doesn't always react to it. He's set up to be a mentor to this young boy, Samuel. How could he be an effective mentor when he seems to have so many other things going wrong in his life? But chapter 3 really is a pivotal point, because we're now introduced more to Samuel, and Samuel will go on to be the main proponent, the main prophet, the main priest of God's work. And Samuel will do God's work well. We saw at the end of chapter 3, in the voices we read, that the Lord blessed Samuel, and none of his words fell to the ground empty. Samuel was an effective worker for God's plan and purposes in the life of Israel. But he needed Eli. In the passage, clearly Samuel did not know who was calling him or what he should do. He thought it was Eli calling him all those times. He'd get up, he'd hear the voice or hear the call, and he'd get up and he'd go to Eli, and he would disturb him every time. And I imagine, just the intonation I tried to put into it, the first couple of times, Eli was probably quite annoyed. Again, from chapter 1, he's a person that rushes to judgment. I can imagine him almost flying off the handle. Until the third time, though. And then Eli himself begins to realize there's something more going on here. Eli is then able to point to Samuel and say, Samuel, it's God calling you. And here's what you should do, Samuel. Here's what you should do. And Samuel does that. And even though he hears a voice of judgment again, he reveals to Samuel, this young boy, that your mentor, Eli, he and his sons, they're going to encounter difficult times because they're disobedient. Notice how Eli still doesn't change, even at the end of it. Instead of saying, wow, he revealed that to you, Samuel? I'd better change my ways. I'd better repent in sackcloth and ashes. All he says is, well, if it seems good to the Lord, then may it come to pass. Eli is a deeply flawed individual in the story. But yet, he's still able to impart something to Samuel that Samuel needs at just that time. And Samuel's able to go on to greater things than Eli or his sons were able to accomplish, even though Eli was an imperfect mentor. Here's a couple of things I think that pays off, or the payoffs for us. One, I do not think that our flaws should prevent us from pouring into the lives of others. I don't think we can get much more flawed than Eli. And yet, God used him at just the right time and just the right way to influence this young boy named Samuel in the trajectory that he would take to be a person of influence in Israel. Our flaws do not disqualify us from being a mentor. Second thing, don't allow our flaws to be an excuse, though. Samuel grows on to be an effective leader for the house of Israel. But if you know the story of Samuel well, there comes a time in Samuel's life where he's getting up in years. And it's time for him to kind of pass off the scene, and his leadership mantle is going to have to be passed on to the next generation. And the people of Israel come up to him and say, Samuel, your sons are not like you. Don't make them leaders over us. How does that sound familiar? Eli may have passed on some very good things to Samuel, but it seems to be the narrative suggesting that Eli also passed on perhaps some of his flaws. And so when we think about mentorship, yes, imperfection doesn't allow us off the hook to be able to pour into the lives of others, but on the other hand, we should not be satisfied with our imperfections either. There's always things that we can work on, and even in mentorship, we're going to pass on some of our flaws perhaps to the people that we mentor, but that does not disqualify us from mentorship. As we come this morning, we think about our role within our fellowship and our church community, as we think about our community that we're a part of, just having come through Vacation Bible School and the opportunity we've had to visit and to spend time with children and their families. Who do you have in your life that you are pouring into to make a positive impact? And even if we may think, I just have a lot of things going on in my own life that I don't have straight, I don't think I should be pouring into the life of somebody else. Our imperfections do not disqualify us from being a mentor in the life of someone else. But again, let's not be dissatisfied or satisfied with our imperfections either. You have someone in your life that you're learning from, someone that you're able to lean on. Who are you spending time to pour into for the good of God's kingdom?